Good morning. Welcome to School Choice Ohio's presentation of how to be a John Peterson and Autism provider webinar series. This is our first of 4 webinars we're going to be presenting. Today's webinar, though, will be a little bit longer. We've got a great panel that will be doing the presentation. And what I'm asking today is that if you have any questions, and I encourage you to ask questions after each of the 3 presentations, feel free to include your questions in the chat room, and I will then repeat the questions to our presenters so they can answer them. And if the question is for a specific presenter, obviously after the presentation, I will address them. Or if it's for the whole panel, that's fine. Again, this is a recording, so you'll be able to access this recording later. We will send you a link. And again, if you have any questions, please use the chat room. And I would ask that you mute. And I want to welcome next our presenters today. We have 3 wonderful people who I've gotten the opportunity to get to know and really enjoy getting to know them. First one is Dave Nichols, who is with St. Joseph Catholic School in Maumee. He is the principal, and I've known Dave for a number of years. Kathy Stoops is next. She is the John Peterson Director of Holy Family in Poland, Ohio. Lots of energy. Kathy's great, and she's in a new role. She was formerly the principal of Holy Family and has gone back to directing the John Peterson program. She will be speaking on implementation challenges, and I'm sorry, Dave will be speaking on first steps. Lastly, we have Melissa Armine, who is the superintendent of Skyward Academy in Cincinnati, and she will be doing her presentation on testing and progress monitoring. We're going to start first with Dave. So Dave, I'm going to have you unmute yourself. And again, Dave is with St. Joe's Catholic School in Maumee and is going to be talking about first steps. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I know that we got a 15-minute time limit, so I'm going to try to talk as fast and concise, but that goes 100% against my personality. So we're St. Joseph's in Maumee, Ohio. We're a suburban school that borders right up against Toledo Public Schools. We have 300 students, K to 8. We're represented by 10 different public school districts that our students come from. And then we also have 65 preschoolers. Our special education staff, our special education department, we actually work it 2 ways. We have an ASP speech therapist, and she has students on service plans. And then we have our John Peterson kiddos. Our John Peterson kiddos, we have 20 of them. And of those 20, there's 5 of them that are category 1, which is a speech IEP. And then there's 15 that are they are on services, speech and above intervention services. So we do have a full-time intervention specialist. We have 2 paraprofessionals. We have a part-time speech therapist that works just with the John Peterson kids, and we have a part-time occupational therapist that also works with the John Peterson kids. So we started John Peterson 8 years ago. What we had is we had a family that moved in from Florida. They're a great family. They're a devout Catholic family. They wanted their daughters in a Catholic school. So they came to us, the one girl came to us in 1st grade, and she had cochlear implants. And I was kind of at a loss on what to be able to do to help this girl out. And what happened was she was born deaf. And for 3 years of her life, she was unable to hear. So then she had her cochlear implants. So essentially she was learning English as a second language. So she needed intervention. She needed to get caught up. She lost pretty much a lot of her kindergarten year, and she's far behind. So we decided to make the decision to go ahead and apply for the Peterson scholarship the second half of the school year because we missed the opening window. We were approved for the scholarship. We hired a part-time intervention specialist. It actually happened to be a sister of Notre Dame who was retired, and she came out of retirement to come over and work with our young 1st grader. We also managed to get a retired speech therapist to come out of retirement and work with her for speech services. And that's our humble beginnings. It was just 1 student, part-time, and from that it's grown up to 20 students and several different employees in the department. So the first thing that I think that anybody has to do when they're John Peterson, believe it or not, before you even apply for the scholarship, is know your public district, especially your home district. One of the things that we have is we have a great working relationship with Maumee City Schools. Their special education director, their school psychologist are the people that we worked closely with, being able to understand what type of processes they want out of us if we're looking to qualify a kid, or if a student's moving into our school, being able to get them the IEP and the ETR so that they're in compliance, because it's ultimately their responsibility to make sure the IEP and the ETR are in compliance. The school psychologist for Maumee City Schools does all of our ETR testing, and then the public district from where the student is writes the IEP. So having a good working relationship with them.
Alexa, turn off.
Having a good working relationship with your public district is a must. However, some public districts don't want to play nice in the sandbox because they might not think that your school should exist. So with that, the second thing to really do is to know the law. Know what rights that your parents have, know what rights the schools have, and the public districts that can be a challenge, they still have to follow the law. So going to ODE's website and downloading everything under the sun and sitting there at a few nights, being able to read it and being able to take it to meetings with you and highlighting things that the public districts are required to do can help you in the long run. So if once you decide to become a Peterson provider, you have to apply through the SAFE portal. And some of the initial hurdles that you really end up having is first and foremost is your staff. Our teachers were scared to death that we were all of a sudden going to start taking students on IEPs. So we had a few faculty meetings. And one of the things that really won the teachers over more than anything else is I just asked them the simple question of what students in the building do you think are on an IEP? And we had a fifth grader that was kind of a handful. He was all over the board. He's in my office quite a bit. And every single teacher in the building said that he has to be the one that's on the IEP. And I go, nope, I'm sorry. It's the little girl with cochlear implants in first grade. And once they started to realize that they're going to receive help from the intervention specialist, they're going to receive help from paraprofessionals, they're going to receive help from the speech therapist, they're going to receive help from tutoring, the teachers became more and more on board. So their biggest concern, I think, is they were the ones that were going to service the IEP, and convincing and making sure the teachers know, no, it's your job to help support the student. It's not your job to service the IEP, put their minds at ease, and they all came on board with the process. So when you go to apply, do not view correction needed as a bad thing that comes back from the Peterson portal. Just view it as another challenge that you have to solve. So every time you upload paperwork, every time you put a student in, every time something's going to come back correction needed in the portal, just correct what is needed to be corrected and don't get discouraged. Keep your chin up. So initial paperwork upload is what I really had problems with. So making sure your fire and your safety inspections are up to date. They need to be within at least the calendar year. The fee schedule, I gave a copy of our fee schedule to Ann, and she'll share that with you after the presentation so that you can see what we charge. And working with Sue Cosmo, who's the director of John Peterson at the state level, I'm quoting her. She goes, "It's your fee schedule. Charge what you want to charge for your services." So the other thing was getting our insurance liability, because the Diocese of Toledo did not understand what I was asking for. So that took a while to be able to get, but that I also sent Ann a copy of that. And then our W-9 needs to be uploaded year in and year out. So after you get that uploaded, the next thing to be able to do is to put your faculty and staff into the portal, and the key people to put in that portal are the people that are going to be providing services. So if you're looking to hire an intervention specialist, you have to have the intervention specialist into the portal and approved by ODE before you can start assigning services to students, because it won't let you to be able to do that. So just make sure that you have your faculty and staff uploaded. It's pretty easy. You put them in, you're allowed to just search their licenses right there in the Peterson portal. You check them off. And then once you have everything uploaded, you'll have a liaison with ODE. Just email them and say, hey, I have people that haven't been approved in my Peterson portal. Can you get them approved? And they usually approve them within a day. And that's not a difficult task. It just could be time consuming if you're uploading several people. The other thing also that you do have to upload is a copy of your handbook. And you have to have FERPA in there. If you're accepting students on IEP, you have to have the FERPA law in your handbook. So, and you have to follow that because all of your IEPs are immensely confidential paperwork, and you have to make sure that you're communicating to your parents via the handbook and to ODE that you're following the Federal Protection Act. The other thing also, before you really get started, is to be able to read the IEPs. So in the IEP, towards the back, it's the pages that I look at. I let the intervention specialist handle everything else. But in the back is service and minutes. So in the back of the IEP, there's going to end up being a service page. Those are the services that the student requires. And then the minutes are the minimum number of minutes per month, per week, that student should be receiving those services. We always usually go above and beyond those. You're always fine to go above and beyond to be able to bill for those services, but you should hit the minimum number of minutes of those services. Another decision with Peterson is we do have the ability to turn our scholarship over to the ESC and let them manage the program. And that's a decision you're going to have to make. Here at St. Joe's Maumee, we manage the program. We do not leave it to ESC, and there's pros and cons on both sides. The big one for us being our own provider is my intervention specialist is my intervention specialist. So if I have a student that's not an IEP, our intervention specialist is a St. Joseph's employee. I can ask her to go in and do a classroom observation, or I can go in and ask her to meet with the student, and I'm not going to receive any grief for that. But if ESC is running the program, it's not as much work for me. They hire the people, they manage it, and they take care of it. But I'm kind of a control freak, so I think Peterson will always be under the control of St. Joseph's Maumee as long as I'm principal. The other really key thing to start out is know your state forms. So one of the key forms to familiarize yourself with is everything that starts with a PR from ODE. So it's a PR01, PR04, PR06. The PR01 is just parent permission if you're going to request for testing. The public school district usually handles that particular form. The PR04 is a request for testing. Once you fill out the PR04 and you turn it over to the public district on a student, they have 60 days to either do the testing on a student, which is a multi-factored evaluation, or they have to give a justifiable explanation as to why they're not going to do testing on a student. And then if the ETR, which is the evaluation team response, which is the results from the testing, shows that a student should qualify for services, they have 30 days to be able to write the IEP. Once they write the IEP, you can then put the student into the Peterson portal and get them to become a John Peterson Scholarship recipient. The PR06 is immensely important. The PR06 is a request to modify services form, I believe. I might actually have that number wrong. I would have to double check. But the request to modify services, and the very large advantage to Peterson, especially if you're hesitant on starting out Peterson, if you have kids that are on a service plan for speech, you can transfer those kids over into the Peterson Scholarship, and then those speech service plans will become speech IEPs, and those students will be speech in John Peterson, which is category 1. You cannot bill for tuition for category 1 students, but once they're on speech, the parents can use any remaining balance of the scholarship for any other type of service that you potentially could offer. So if a speech student needs intervention services, once you get them into the Peterson Scholarship portal, if you're using $3,000 for speech services, you have about $4,500 left over for intervention services if you fill out the request to modify services form. And that gives the student goals and objectives from your intervention specialist that would be able to, you would be able to use for those services. So request to modify services form is the official title. And I might have the state number wrong, but it's one of our wonderful PR numbers through ODE. So just go to the search bar in ODE and search PR01, and you'll get a bunch of PR02, 03, 04 forms. Once you have everything going well, and the kids uploaded into the portal, then it's you're a John Peterson provider and your name's out there. The only thing that I caution principals on is to make sure you can provide the services that are necessary for the students that you're accepting. If you can't provide services, that's a tough conversation to have with parents, but it's better for them to find the appropriate school than to be to your school, and you're not doing justice to the student. So that can range from a variety of reasons as to why you're not providing the services, that you're not capable of providing the services that you're providing. So we had a mom contact us. Her daughter had a cerebral palsy, and most of our classrooms are on the second floor, and I didn't have an elevator at the time. So just the physical layout of the building didn't allow us to be able to accept that particular student. So my time is up. If there's any questions, I'm hopefully happy to answer them, and I hope I kept that direct and to the point.
Dave, you did great. So far, we don't have any questions in the chat room. You guys also have an opportunity at the end of the 3 presentations. And you can obviously answer questions or ask questions during the whole webinar. But what I'd like to now is introduce Kathy Stoops, who's going to do implementation challenges. She's with Holy Family Catholic School in Poland, Ohio, which I never knew there was a Poland, Ohio. So that's very fun. But anyway, thank you, Dave. And I'm going to say hello to Kathy.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Anne. Thank you. Poland is a suburb of Youngstown. We're almost in PA. We're about 10 minutes outside of PA. I'm far east over here. Dave's on the far west, and I happen to go to Bowling Green, Dave. So that's where I student taught in Mommy. A couple things I'm going to go off of what Dave said first. I totally agree, and the relationship with your public school is extremely important. I know them personally, and we all have each other's cell phones because it's that kind of relationship, because yes, they are responsible for the student's IEP, but even though Catholic schools and private schools are not held to FAPE, I have always believed that if I take the John Peterson and I implement that IEP and tell the parent I'm going to implement that IEP, I basically am committing to FAPE, to giving them their free appropriate education, and then the John Peterson pays for it. I know Dave might have scared you with some of the paperwork. Dave may not have Ed Choice because the paperwork for getting yourself approved as a provider is the same as basically the same things are imported. Your handbook, your insurance waivers, all those things. And once you are accepted in the portal for Ed Choice or Ed Choice expansion, then John Peterson, those same forms, are imported. Same thing with staff. Once you put the staffing in there, then you're accepted in, for the John Peterson also. So we have both. So that makes it okay. Sorry. All right. Some of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and Dave touched on them. I think, and I said, when I began 9 years ago at the beginning, I had the benefit of being principal, but I also am and still am a special ed teacher and was. So I had a passion for the special ed. I also, like Dave, had a very, very active parent at my school when I came here 10 years ago. She preceded me, who had a child on the autism spectrum here at Holy Family, that they were paying for all of her services because they wanted her in a Catholic school with her brother. And the mother is a special ed attorney and obviously knows her rights. And not that she couldn't force the Catholic school, but she wanted her child in this environment and was willing to do anything. So her and I implemented the program from the very beginning. I went in, I had an advantage over that I'm going to speak to you about. Hiring a special ed teacher that is your employee can be a challenge because you have to do that up front, and billing is always after the services had been provided. So billing comes after. So you're kind of always in the hole till you get your program going. You're always billing after you provide services. So I happen to be a special ed teacher, and I went on and I've been running as the provider, as the teacher of record, and I've been running the program ever since. So, but we have since hired 3. I have 3 full-time special ed teachers, and I take all disabilities. I take cognitively impaired, which as moving forward, we might not, because they have to be out of the classroom more than inclusion kids. And I also do have obviously LD, and I do have 1 visually impaired, and I have 7 autistic children. I'm in a very similar school district to Dave. So, and it's a very high performing school. So that was one of my challenges. So I guess some of my questions I think you need to consider when you're starting this program. Some of your challenges will be, and Dave already touched on this. Number 1, do you have students in your school already that need services? I did, and there were other ones too, besides the 1 child I spoke about, but if you have children that are on service plans, then your teachers are somewhat familiar, and you probably have an auxiliary or a title special ed teacher working with them at some time during the day. So if you already have children on service plans, then you're probably somewhat familiar with working with kids with some types of disability. Some schools, once a child's identified, ask them to leave, or, tell the parent that they cannot service them. So if that's been your past experience, it might be harder for your staff and administration to adjust to children with disabilities. We had them here already on service plans, as Dave talked about. Is your staff accepting of children with disabilities? Do they feel it's going to scare them? Do they feel like they can, are they young enough and willing to get some training and experience and learn how to deal with children with disabilities, or are they going to fight that? That, frankly, for me, has been an ongoing battle. Older teachers that were used to, just saying, I never was taught how to teach children with disabilities, will sometimes hunker down with that mindset. It's a fixed mindset, and it's hard to change. And so I said another thing I think you need to look at is who is the administration in your building. If it's you, the people that are on, and you have a growth mindset and a desire to service these kind of children, then, that will be helpful. If it's like, oh, I have to get, training after training in to deal with this kind of program, I think sometimes that becomes more of an obstacle for administration, and the teachers see that as an obstacle. Do you have the funds to hire, at least, like Dave said, at least a part-time special ed teacher that is your employee? You would have to hire them when you apply to be a provider. So you have to have some funds up front that you bill after the services are provided. So frankly, I'm just getting ready to do up to September. I haven't this year of a staff of, I have 9 aides and 3 special ed teachers and myself that have all been paid already this year, but I haven't billed at all yet this year. So obviously the parish has to be able to withstand, and we save funds from last year. Now that we've implemented it, we save funds from last year to start this year till we start billing. So your billing comes after you provide the services. The other problem that I have run into substantially is that once children are John Peterson, if they've been on Ed Choice, they can no longer get Ed Choice. And I have never used the John Peterson for tuition. I have always used all of the John Peterson for services, whether they're OT services, PT services, I have children on the spectrum that have full-time aides. So I have always used my money for services. People can apply for financial aid. And I sometimes can use some of the funds that I have left over from John Peterson, but so we've gotten into that. If I have a child that's LD or cognitively impaired that needs a special ed teacher, say an hour a day, and they're getting $10,000, that's what they get, $10,058. And I have to use 5,000 of that for tuition. I literally don't have enough money to service that child and give them all the services they need. So there's issues if you're ed choice and those kids go into the John Peterson, they have to waive the ed choice. They can't take both. And obviously you want the higher amount, which is the John Peterson. So that can be, and we're still wrestling with that in my parish 9 years later and in our budget, like how we're going to deal with that, because I obviously don't want a child that's identified while they're here to then say you have, ask them to leave because they can't pay their tuition. So if you're a tuition paying school, I'd be glad to talk to you about that, but we make it known that we do not use our John Peterson money for tuition, because they can apply for financial aid, but we can't just apply it for tuition. And one of the other reasons I made notes is then you're overwhelmed with admissions from low performing schools. And then you have to clarify your admission policy. You don't want all the children that are on IEPs, because they hear about you if you do a good job. And frankly, I get a lot of requests to come here because I do think we do a very good job with our special ed students and our typical kids, because they've done well academically too. And so how are you going to screen admission and what you're, going to do about who you are going to take and who you're not going to take? Because obviously in our present day situation, a lot of people will think, well, you just don't want to take my child because of their race or because of their disability or something. They'll try and put the pressure on you to take a child that you cannot serve. So I think those were the things I wanted to talk to you about. I'm trying to think, just to me, those were the biggest challenges: staffing, and if the staff had the right attitude for working with children with disabilities and getting them the right training and being able to afford it all.
Kathy, no, that's great. And we've actually had a few questions, and some of our questions have already been answered, but I will. Okay, so the first question that was asked: how do we turn a service plan into an IEP? Who is responsible? District of residence? Question mark. Home district of student. We have 18 kids on service plans now. Some of this you guys have kind of already answered, but I'll let you kind of go back over that. Obviously, how do you turn a service plan into an IEP?
That's the public school district's responsibility. And they just turn a service plan is an IEP. It's just not called, it has you usually just write the same goals. And I happen to have the same, and Dave, I'm sure, could speak to this. I deal with about 14 school districts in my school and about 12 different ones with children with disabilities. So where the school is responsible for doing the ETR, the child find. That's where the school is located. So your public school, where your school is located, has to do child find, and you do not have to pay for that. That's all under child find law. The school of residence has to write and handle the meeting of the IEP, because if that child leaves you, they are responsible for implementing it. So they don't ever want to agree to anything that they would not agree to if that child was sitting in their classroom. So the school where you are does all the testing, where you're located, the public school, and then the ETR, the IEPs are done by where the child resides.
I just, one of the
Yeah.
things I want to add on to that, and you have to work with your local district on this one and see what they want and prefer. So for example, Maumee City Schools really would prefer to do all of their own testing themselves. And so you'll have parents that will want to go out and take their child to a child psychologist, pay for a test, and then they have the results and they hand it to you and they say, here, get this to Maumee Schools because my kid qualifies for services. And then Maumee Schools will take that into consideration, but they want their own testing and their own results. And a lot of the tests that they do are biased if they're done too close together. So a great way, just communicate with your parents that that service is free. Let our public district do the multi-factored evaluation and let us get the results from them because they're the ones that are looking to help qualify, or that Maumee Schools wants the children on the correct path. So if that's having a hard conversation, I'm saying, I'm sorry, they don't qualify, but they really should be on a minor adjustment plan, then that's the direction that we need to take. And that's what we're talking to. You will have parents that are just looking to qualify their student because they want the John Peterson to cover the tuition. So have the conversation. Yes, we have financial assistance. Don't worry about tuition. You're going to apply for financial assistance. You're going to apply in different avenues to help with tuition. The Peterson scholarship, it's always services first, tuition second. So if the scholarship uses up all of the services, it uses up all of the services, and that's that. The way we communicate home to our parents is what's called a memorandum of understanding, which essentially just breaks down the billing amount for each one of the services that they receive based off of the minutes that are on that services description page in the IEP. And then what's left over, I do utilize that for tuition for the parents, but it does depend on every individual student is different because the scholarship has 6 different categories. And yes, most of the categories are $10,058, but we have a little girl who does have Down syndrome. So she receives $24,000 approximately, but there's a lot of services that are used up in that. So even though the scholarship is more, there isn't any left over for tuition in her particular case. So
We had one more question.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Dave. What about students on 504 plans? Are they eligible for John Peterson?
No, they're not. But the 504, if you're doing a response to intervention, that's a leveled response, is pretty much the last step before an IEP. So you would want to monitor your students closely, and I'm sure that'll be touched on with progress monitoring at the end. But those are the students that you're keeping an eye on. And if they were tested and parents are pushing you, the public school district can retest the next year to see if they qualify for services. The ETR, which is the evaluation team response, which is the initial meeting, the initial ETR meeting, you'll bring the parents in, you'll bring the public district in, and you will be there. The teacher will be there. That's when you will state what concerns you have. The public district at that point will say, okay, we're going to test for XYZ. Then the final ETR meeting to determine qualification will happen after the testing's finished. The public district will state this is why we believe they qualify or why we believe they don't qualify. There's specific learning disabilities that are defined by the state of Ohio. That's the route the public district will look for. So there's 3 language arts / reading qualifiers. There's 2 math, they're obviously speech language, vision or hearing impaired qualification. There's also what is called other health impaired minor and other health impaired major. So the best way to describe other health impaired minor, if you have a student that's on a 504 because you have a pediatric diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so you're doing preferential seating, you're doing accommodations in the classroom, that is a good way to go. However, if this student is always in the principal's office and it starts to affect their grades and it's starting to cause them to fall behind to where services might be necessary, if the public school district during their testing determines multi-factor evaluation, they determine that the student qualifies for services, they would put them as an other health impaired minor category, and then they would be eligible for the John Peterson scholarship. That was a long answer.
There you go.
And I would
We're going to
think-
go ahead and get started. I'm sorry, Kathy. We're gonna
That's
get
right. I was
started
just going to
with,
say my public school, the exact same thing. If they will not take outside testing, and we just had a big to-do over it, and I had already told the parent they weren't going to take it, but they want to try to, bring in their own testing, just to have the public school do it. But I was just going to say off Dave too, and don't forget, just do the same ETR process or the RTI, the intervention process that you always do with kids that are struggling. And then you shouldn't have problems. Because I do think that in private schools, sometimes we like to bypass that process of documenting what you have done to help the child before you have decided to have them tested. That's really important. I know a lot of my teachers try to buck me on that. Well, you can't just say, hey, I think this child needs tested, and it's time consuming and expensive for them to test children.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that. So the qualifying a student does not happen overnight. We have to do 10 to 12 weeks of progress monitoring to justify to Maumee City Schools that PRO4 that we're submitting is necessary. If we don't do that, then we look like we have egg on our face, because Maumee City Schools goes back to the parent and they says, we don't justify testing at this particular point in time because the school did not progress monitor your child. And so the parent's going to ask us, how come you're not progress monitoring? And then I get to go down to the teacher and I get to ask them, how come you're not progress monitoring? So it's getting the teachers on board to be able to do that. It makes the process so much easier to be able to just hand Maumee City Schools the progress monitoring.
Yep. So Melissa Amrine's a superintendent of Skyward Academy in Cincinnati, is going to speak on testing and progress monitoring.
Okay, I am Melissa, and yes, Skyward is located in suburban Cincinnati. We serve 200 students in a couple of different settings. We have an elementary building and a secondary building that serve only students on IEPs. And then we, as Peterson Scholarship, are a provider of services for several chartered non-publics in the Cincinnati area. And I'm going to give you a little piece of good news, because I know over the years that Peterson has been in effect, there were a lot of schools that shied away from it because of the notion of, well, Peterson requires state testing. And it was seen as one more hurdle for Peterson provider schools to go through. But the good news is that, yes, the Peterson Scholarship comes with a requirement that students must participate in Ohio State assessments. That being said, every year ODE publishes a list of approved assessments. And so there are several options for a Peterson providing school to meet the testing requirement that may or may not involve additional testing. Oftentimes, I have found it does not involve taking on additional testing, because many of the chartered non-pubs are already doing some of the approved assessments. So, for example, if you are a high school chartered non-pub, you have three choices for fulfilling the Peterson Scholarship testing requirements. Choice one would be the end of course exams that all of the publics take. But another option would be the Terra Nova, or the third option would be the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. So most charter non-pubs, if they're not doing the end of course assessments, are doing Terra Nova or Iowa Test of Basic Skills at the high school level. You can substitute Iowa or Terra Nova for the end of courses. So it would mean no additional testing requirements for your high school students who are on John Peterson. The additional requirement would be that you are going to have to go into the Peterson portal and upload those scores every year for your students to renew their scholarships. Now, at grades 3 through 8, it's a little bit different because there's a different list of approved assessments. But again, most chartered non-pubs are doing some of these. So for your Peterson students who would be in grades 3 through 8, you could do the state testing in the English language arts, math, and science. Or if your school already does Iowa Test of Basic Skills, or already does iReady, or does map testing, or does star reading or star math. Those are all on the list of approved assessments. Now, what's important, and I'll put a little cautionary statement, is every year ODE updates that list of approved assessments. And sometimes tests fall on it or off of it. So you do need to check every year. But if for a chartered non-public that already does Iowa, for example, or already does star reading and math, you don't need to do the state air testing for those. So for example, one of the chartered non-pubs that we have here that Skyward works with does star reading and math. And so the only thing we need to add on for Peterson testing is the science part. So it's not a whole lot of extra in most cases. And there's options for that. The other part of the state testing is if you are using the public school state tests, the end of course at the high school level, or the air tests for grades 3 through 8, you do have to go into the state testing system and register the students and go through that process of getting them signed up, getting the test. They are online tests, meeting the technology requirements to give those tests. But like I said, there's several different pathways with the state testing to meet that requirement. And I know when schools find out, doesn't necessarily mean you have to add a whole entire extra testing burden on. That's seen as a real plus for adding Peterson. Then the other part of that concerns the progress monitoring. And the Peterson Scholarship does require IEP progress reports to be completed 4 times per year. They are quarterly progress reports. And the Peterson Scholarship's definition of quarterly is not the same as your grading period quarters. The Peterson Scholarship has very firm deadlines for those quarterly IEP progress monitoring reports. And they are based on the fiscal quarters because the Peterson Scholarship links IEP progress reports with the ability to invoice and bill for services. So 4 times a year, September, December, March, and then the end of the school year or June is when the IEP progress reports have to be filed under Peterson. Those are usually done by the person providing the service. So either the intervention specialist, or if you have SLPs or OTs providing the service, you have to get into the Peterson portal again and do your IEP progress reports. This is the data that Dave and Kathy were talking about for progress monitoring that has to be done. On those quarterly reports, 4 times a year, one thing that has to be coordinated is who is going to do those reports. It may or may not be the same person that's doing your billing, but the person that's doing your billing is not going to be able to bill at the end of the quarter until those quarterly progress monitoring reports are in there. Those IEP quarterly reports are in there. So it may require, if it's 2 different people doing it, kind of figuring out for your school who's going to be the responsible party. And I saw there were some questions in chat about, well, who bills? Is it a secretary? Is it an intervention specialist? Different schools do different things. I think it all depends. Same with who does the progress reports. So in the chartered non-pubs that we work with, the intervention specialists do the progress reports, but then our billing person actually uploads those into the Peterson portal because she uploads the progress reports and the progress monitoring and then does the billing. I know some other chartered non-pubs do it where the intervention specialist just does the progress reports and then somebody else goes in a month or so later and does the billing. So it's just involving coordinating who is going to be responsible for doing that. The other piece of progress monitoring that comes into play under Peterson is when these students need to be reevaluated for every 3 years. Once, we talked about the initial evaluation and ETR to qualify them for services, but every 3 years they need to be reevaluated. And there's often going to be a need for your intervention staff, and perhaps if they receive speech or OT services, to write those additional evaluation reports and present data to help determine that they still qualify for the special education services. It involves, Dave and Kathy both spoke to relationships and building these relationships with your public schools and the districts of residence that your students are in. And that it just adds another layer to it, because those relationships are going to be important, so that you are providing the data that the public school is going to need to maintain the qualification for special education services for those students to continue to receive the services. But I know when Peterson started, there was a lot of hesitation on the part of schools because they thought the testing requirements were going to really add an extra burden onto the staff and the progress monitoring. But what I found is that it's a lot of things that your good schools, you guys are already doing. You're already monitoring and tracking progress. You're already doing assessments. So it may not be as big of an extra burden as you think it is on these. That's a real brief overview of testing and progress monitoring. There's probably a whole lot of questions that I'm happy to answer regarding those.
I'm looking, we haven't had any questions recently. Thank you, Kathy. Anybody else? Because if not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share their contact information. So if you do have questions later for our presenters today, their emails are right here and their schools and names. So if you want to reach out to them individually, feel free to email them. And I will also follow up with a follow-up email, so you'll have them as well. But this is their in contact information. So if you want to reach out to them separately.
And I was going to ask, because I'd be interested myself in Dave and Melissa's answer. What we do for billing, because I know billing scares everybody. We do a spreadsheet of how we do a spreadsheet, and it takes us all the month of September, who's we're giving who, what services when. Like, because some of them go to 2 different special ed teachers, one for math, one for reading in our middle school. Anyway, and some have different aides at different times to the day. And then we break it up and bill for the exact same amount every month. So I think that I was worried when I started learning billing that you'd have to, like, if it's a short month and it's December, but they allow you to take the money that you're going to get it, decide on what services you're going to give that child every day. And then I break mine up over 10 months. Is that how you guys do it? Or do you bill like different amounts for each week?
I can tell you that we do it both ways, depending on the setting. We do exactly what you do in terms of, at the start of the school year, we basically make a plan for every student that details minutes per service, and then go by that. And so for some of our students, yes, it's the same. And we just, once we bill that, it's straight for 10 months. For others, though, if there's a lot, so for example, at one of the Bible academies here in town, there's a lot of pull out that varies because of their school schedule. And so they actually do a spreadsheet every month and track time and break it down. So Johnny may have 300 minutes of reading intervention in October and only 280 minutes of reading intervention in November. It can get tedious at times if you're doing it that way. One of, I think, the biggest issues to figure out as a new provider is how are you going to handle the billing so that the process does not become so tedious and overwhelming, because it can very easily. Especially if you've got multiple services and you've got aid services and then intervention services and then OT.
Right. That's why I didn't want to, and you're a little bit different. I didn't want to overwhelm them or scare them, because I think it is very difficult in September and August, when we start. But once you figure out what services kids are getting, we just bill the same amount every month, and ODE is fine with that.
Yeah, they haven't had any problems with that, doing it that way.
I don't want to have billing discourage anybody. I'm the chief billing officer for Peterson. I'm in charge of the MUOs. And that's what I do. Yes, September is a couple weeks worth of paperwork that you have to get out to the parents. So our memorandum of understanding, our MUOs, break down the services, the number of minutes based off of the IEPs and the charges for those services. And then if there is any tuition involved, that is on there as well. And then that goes out to the parents. I take those MUOs, I go to the billing site, I do exactly what Kathy's doing. I break it out over 10 months, but I make December 50% of what they're being charged that month, and August 50%. And I just spread that amount over the other 8 months so that all the other 8 months are all the same. And then I enter that into billing based off of the memorandum of understanding. Usually, because if we're using tuition, not usually, if we're using it for tuition, it's using the entire scholarship. If you're not using the entire scholarship, you might want to do the other process to where you're tracking those minutes so that you're billing appropriately for that. Because I'm not concerned because we're using the entire scholarship in those instances. However, for the speech only kiddos, I go to make sure that the speech therapist knows that if she goes above the minimum number of minutes, let me know, because I can bill for those extra minutes. So she just turns in a timesheet to me at the end of the month to show how many minutes she worked with each student. And then I know if she went over.
We also had a question about the use of third-party providers like PSI or MEG in the Northeast Ohio region to get intervention specialists and support for billing. Do any of you guys go that route?
I do for my behavior, for my BCBA, for my children on the spectrum, and I do for OT. All of my special ed teachers and services are in-house.
There is a school here in Cincinnati that does there's actually a couple of them that do contract with a third-party provider for their intervention specialists and then run it through that way.
Okay,
I'm fortunate enough that everybody's my own. So
it's a good
It
gig.
definitely works better if they're your own.
yeah, it does.
It really does.
It solves a lot of
Yes.
paperwork.
Is the cost higher for the third-party providers? Are they more expensive or no?
There's an add-on to it. I think so, because obviously there's an upcharge on that. And you have limited control. You know, it's always like Dave said, it's better if it's your own. If you can hire your own intervention specialist, that would be the way to go.
Super. Okay, I have one more screen to share, and that is, I want to thank obviously all my panelists, and you guys have done an awesome job. We are going to be doing some more webinars in the next couple of weeks, actually into November, which is scary. Planning and getting started. Dave will do a shorter version of today's, starting at 11 o'clock next Thursday, and then the following week, serving students IEPs, testing and monitoring. We're actually going to have a different speaker, Maggie Bender, who's with Marburn Academy in New Albany. She's also going to do a half an hour. So Melissa gets a pass on that one. Anyway, and then also, and she comes, Marburn is in, New Albany, which is in the Columbus area. And then obviously Kathy Stoops will come back and do management and finance, how to bill and charge on Thursday, November 18th at the same time at 11 o'clock. So, and I will include these in my follow-up email, so you guys have the links. But I appreciate the panels being here, and it looks like, let me see, let me make sure I'm not missing a question. We had a one comment, I'm surprised you have enough work and money to hire your own. This is back to our intervention specialist and your staff.
No, and I'll go back to what I originally started with. It started small. We had a part-time intervention specialist that was only here a couple days a week. I believe I was very fortunate that she was a sister in Notre Dame, but we still had to pay for her services. So that was just essentially sending it to the sisters instead of making her on staff as far as just receiving a paycheck through us. As we started to have more students with IEPs come to the building, then that forced us to look for a bigger part-time intervention specialist who turned into a full-time intervention specialist. Currently, our speech therapist is part-time. working with us, but she's getting very close to becoming full-time because of the number of students that we're picking up. As the program goes, those people that are employed through us, they start to get more and more hours here because they're on an hourly basis, and eventually they end up, they like it here. So they have other schools that they do go to that they work at, but they like it here, and they end up, wanting more hours through us. So as the students come in, and there's IEPs, we give them more hours that they want to be here.
And I have to say that initially too, my special ed teacher at the very beginning was able to stay part-time with auxiliary, with the public school, with Poland schools, because that's where she had been being hired originally, and then part-time with us. I just had to be careful with the billing that I didn't double dip, but you can utilize somebody, if they're part-time. She was only part-time with the public school, and she was a great teacher. So it was a great way for me to transition. And then, as Dave said, the more and more you get and the more you take on, then you have to look for other staffing. But it's if you have somebody that's already working with the kids on service plans, there's a way to kind of transfer it over little by little and still use your idea money for that, because you don't want to forfeit your idea money either.
Super. Awesome. Nice job, guys. I definitely want to end by 12 because I know you all are probably ready for a little lunch break or have to go deal with lunches. Anyway, I thank you all for participating. Again, I will follow up with the contact information for our panelists today, as well as the other webinars, and a link for the recording. You guys all have a great day, and I appreciate you participating. And I really appreciate our 3 panelists today. They're awesome. Thank you all.